Hello all and welcome to our brand new daily show, The Big Story, where we bring you the hottest topics of the day right here from the heart of the newsroom. My name is Alyssa Wu and I'm from the Straits Times, and we are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube. And if you're on YouTube right now, do click the bell button to be notified whenever we go live. I'll be joined by my newsroom colleagues to talk about the topics that got you talking today. Now, this weekend saw Singapore host the 18th Shangri-La Dialogue, which was attended by many ministerial-level delegates, chiefs of defence forces and senior defence officials here, as well as prominent academics from 47 countries. Last Friday on The Big Story, we talked about what one could expect to happen at the dialogue, and certainly there were a lot of opinions and speeches shared this weekend. And to help us make sense of it all, we have Deputy Foreign Editor Bhagyashree to help us understand what really went down and what was being said. Hello. Now, I guess many were anticipating what US and China had to say, given the current tensions. What do you think are the biggest takeaways?
Well, the biggest thing, like you say, were the opinions, right? So the fact that they came talking here and here in Singapore, talking from the same stage, I think it's been a long time since the two of them were together, that the Chinese and the US defense ministers were talking from the same place, the same stage essentially. So, well, that's what we want in Singapore, and I think well done to Shangri-La folks for making this happen. So the second thing I would say is, well, what they had to say. And in that case, looking at US Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan first, his message was that this region is very important to the US. The word that he used was priority theater. So the Indo-Pacific, which is what they call the region, is a priority theater for the US, that they are invested here and will continue to be so. And I think in this case, he had China in mind, because there is this message coming out from China at times that outsiders stir up trouble in this region. So I think this was a message that Shanahan wanted to send to the region.
However, they were very careful not to name the countries.
Absolutely. So you see, in his speech, he does not mention China. There is this portion which got the headlines quite a bit about China being this actor which is undermining the regional order. But again, China was not named. Everyone understood that implication, but you're right, he wasn't naming them. On the same day of his speech, there was a document released by the Pentagon, which they call the Indo-Pacific Strategy Report. And in that, he does mention China as being a strategic competitor to the US, but certainly not in his speech. The other thing, if you look at now at what the Chinese Defense Minister General Wei had to say, so his was, I guess, the counter argument. Firstly, that China is a peaceful actor here. They are certainly very present in all the economic relationships in the region. That's one. Their intent is not to seek hegemony. Now, this is his own words. And again, it's supposed to be, it is their way of reassuring the region in the light of things that are being said.
However, he did have strong words about the US activities in that region.
You're right. So on two things in particular, which would be Taiwan and South China Sea. So Taiwan, as you know, is a sensitive thing for China. They look at Taiwan as a province which is to be reunified at some time. And when US tends to express support for it, whether that comes diplomatically or militarily, then China sees that as interference in its sovereign affairs. So certainly on that count, he had strong words. And then South China Sea. So this is where it gets, well, interesting, because China says that its military activities, the militarization of, the islands, contested islands, some would say, in South China Sea are a response to US presence. Now, US, especially during Trump administration, has been sending a lot of freedom of navigation patrols. Basically US Navy ships which sail through the waters, asserting that these are international waters free for all to use. And China tends to find the presence of those, ships troubling.
Now, certainly the topics that they discuss in their speeches, many topics up for debate, right? So how did the other ministers and academics who were present at the dialogue, how did they react to their statements?
Exactly. So when we were talking of talkaways, I would say the other big talkaway, and this relates to your question as well, is what Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong had to say. So his message was also very keenly and positively received. So his message was directed at US and China and the region. Basically that both of them belong to this region, have very positive roles to play, and the region welcomes them both. Basically that was his message. And so in that line, when you look at the reaction from the region, there was relief that that these two ministers who are meeting each other, and the body language of that meeting comes across as quite well. Yes, trade tensions are on, but they are willing to talk. Maybe they disagree, but still they're talking, and they're talking, agreeing to talk. So that's a very positive thing that came out of this meeting.
Now, how about our Defense Minister Ng Han? He met the counterparts and he was watching closely the interaction between US and China. As for what US and China made of what they said on Taiwan?
So US and China, what they said meant made of each other. Okay, so US, well, Secretary Shanahan had left, so we didn't actually get a comeback from him. But we did manage to talk to one of his senior officials, and I think US interpretation was that these tough words which came out of the Chinese defense minister were meant for consumption back home, basically for the domestic audience. That's what US saw of it. The US continues to maintain its stand that it is a natural presence here, it's going to be here, and that the criticisms that they have on China's militarization activities, they stand. They're not going to be stopping those freedom of navigation patrols anytime soon. From the China side, I think the Chinese minister had already reacted to Mr. Shanahan's comments in his speech. So I think that's where you heard all those messages and tough words. You're right.
Okay, now because the US and China, they have such a big presence in the region, as you have mentioned a couple of times, do you think that the ASEAN countries will have to take sides eventually?
No, the whole idea is hopefully they do not have to take sides, because I think ASEAN is very clear on this point that both US and China belong to the region, and the region has benefited from relationships with them, whether it comes to business and economics or whether it comes to security. So hopefully the idea is that it doesn't come to the point where they have to take sides, because these two have tensions between themselves. And I think Prime Minister Lee had this part in his speech where he spoke about elephants. He used this analogy that when elephants fight, big people fight, the grass suffers. Similarly, he said when elephants make love, the grass suffers. So I think the hope is that things don't get too exciting between these two big powers we have in our region.
Thank you so much, Bhagya. That was a very visual way to kind of summarize the relationship between US and China, and of course us, putting us in context. Thank you so much for coming on the show to discuss that.